Hi guys, welcome to 4K channel. I've been wanting to share my collection of Queen Elizabeth banknotes. So I went through my albums and pulled out all different British territory notes, and when I put them together, I realized a lot of them have something in common. So besides mostly green and red in color, they all have the same portrait of young Queen Elizabeth. And this got me thinking, where have I seen this before? So it bothered me for a while until I went through my stamps collection and I found this. So I've been collecting stamps longer than I've been collecting banknotes. These are stamps from Hong Kong and they have the same portrait of Queen Elizabeth. And these are one of my favorite stamps. So it made sense that subconsciously I've been collecting banknotes with the same portrait of the Queen in her 20s. So I thought maybe I can share with you different portraits of the Queen on banknotes. So we're going to start with this portrait. So in 1952, 26-year-old Queen Elizabeth II came to the throne, and a lot of photographs and portraits were done to basically update all the British Empire coins, stamps, and banknotes. And among them was this famous portrait based on this full-length painting of the Queen wearing her Regalia of Order of the Garter, which is basically an oversized cloak with these big ribbons and insignia. So this full-length painting was done by a famous Italian painter by the name of Pietro Annigoni, and it was so well liked by everyone, including the Queen, that it was used on many stamps and banknotes all over the British territory. And there were some minor adjustments to the design, particularly by Delarue, where if you look on the original design and if you pay attention to the shading of her cheek, it's a little bit more homogeneous. But on the Delarue modification, they made slight changes to the shading around her cheek just to highlight her cheekbone. But that's a subtle difference, but overall this portrait is very well received and definitely my personal favorite. So let's show you some others. Another very common portrait is based on the work of the royal photographer by the name of Dorothy Wilding. So Dorothy Wilding created a lot of portraits for stamps, and her portraits were also used on coins and banknotes. So here's an example of her work. It shows the Queen wearing this very elaborate diadem. Diadem is basically a diamond crown, and it has over 1,000 stones. So this is a classic Dorothy Wilding portrait, and there were some minor modification, and I don't know if you can see this little minor modification that was done by Bradbury and Wilkinson. So if you compare these two side by side, this being the original, Bradbury, they just did a slight modification and uplifted her chin. I don't know if it's very obvious, but there's a slight difference between the two portraits. And this portrait is quite common on the early banknotes from British territories. Another design is this one from Canada. So this one is based on the work of photographer Yousof Karsh from Canada from 1951. So what they did was they modified his photograph and removed the tiara that the Queen was wearing, and in process of touching her hair, they created this illusion of what's called the devil in the Queen's hair. And I don't know if you're familiar with this type of banknote. I don't have a copy of one, but it gave you the illusion there was a devil in the back of Queen's hair. So this was a big fiasco or an error, and this screw up was later corrected. So this is another portrait that's quite popular. Now, interesting thing about Queen Elizabeth on Canadian banknotes is you'll never find a Canadian note with Queen wearing either a crown, a tiara, or diadem. And I think it has to do with Canada trying to appease its French Canadian population. So they never portray the Queen with crown. I guess crown represents ultimate power. Now, here's another variety where the Queen is looking to the left, and that's not the only difference. So on this Bahamas, and this was also seen on Jamaican banknotes, the Queen is looking over to her left, but the more interesting thing is how much of her bare shoulder you can see. So this is the only example from Bahamas and Jamaica where you have, basically her shoulders exposed in this bare shoulder, kind of like a more feminine look to the Queen. Now, this example I really like. This is the only example I know of, and the only example I have where it reminds you of the famous Machins. So Machin or Machins are this infamous portrait of Queen Elizabeth that you can find on billions of stamps. And it is so well recognized that United Kingdom stamps do not have the country name on it. They just have the Queen's portrait and the denomination, and that's all that's necessary because everyone knows this stamp is from England or UK or Great Britain. So this design is called Machin or Machin, and it's based on the very famous artist or British sculptor by the name of Arnold Machin. So Arnold Machin basically was tasked to make this sculpture, and what he did was he used a photograph of the Queen taken by a photographer, John Hedgecoe, and then he used that photograph to make this clay sculpture of the Queen. And I have a stamp here which kind of mimics that sculpture. I don't know if it's gonna be clear enough to see. Anyways, So in this sculpture, you have the queen wearing the diadem, and then he also added on this corsage that was not on the original photograph. And the queen absolutely loved it. And ever since then, it has been on, like I said, billions of stamps, coins, and you know, this type of portrait is known by the sculptor's last name, Machin. And this is the only banknote that I know of that has that resemblance with what's on the stamp. So this is the banknote from Australia, Commonwealth of Australia. So let's move on. So here's another variety of Queen Elizabeth portrait, and this is on the Isle of Man, and this was done by artist Anthony Buckley in 1966. So at this time, Queen is a little bit older, in her 40s, and she's wearing this Queen Victoria's jewelry, necklace, and her earring. It's called the Colette necklace and earring. And I think this is another very elegant portrayal of the Queen. So as time went along, portraits have changed. As the Queen got older, the portraits were modified to keep up with the times. And this particular portrait is interesting for the fact that it's probably one of the most informal portrait, with the Queen wearing a very simple blouse and these very elegant pearl earring and necklace. This is also from Canada, and as I said before, you won't find a Canadian banknote with the Queen wearing tiara or a crown. Now, I don't have a whole lot of modern banknotes to show you. You know, this is the only one I got with the Queen in her Middle Ages. And what I've noticed is that the Queen, as she has aged, her portrayal has changed. Now you can see there is a little bit more smile on her portraits. Before, there was a hint of a smile, but not quite a smile. But on the more recent banknotes, I mean, there are more recent banknotes where the Queen is actually almost laughing. You can see her teeth. And I think that's really cool. It's really cute. And the Queen is now in her golden years. She's 94 years young, and she's still going strong. So guys, I mean, there are so many portraits. I've only shown you a very small number of portraits, but you can get an idea how interesting her portrayal has been over the years, and all the different stories behind these portraits, all the different artists who have been involved, and all the minor and major modifications that have been done. And it just kind of reminds you why you love British stamps and British currency. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, if you liked my video, please consider subscribing and keep collecting.